Hello and welcome to How to Overcome Common Data Resilience Oversights for Finance, Infrastructure, and Operations Leaders. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward. I am with Actual Tech Media, and I am super pumped to be your moderator for this special event today. And special it is going to be, I promise. But before we get there, I do have to cover some housekeeping items for ya. First off, we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel right there in the middle of your screen. Should be obvious where that is. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be having. If something goes wrong, you can't hear something or see something, if the audio isn't working, give your browser a quick refresh or two. That usually fix whatever is wrong. Will usually fix whatever is wrong. If not, then reach out to us and let us know. We'll hop on and try to help you out. So next up, take a look at the great free resources in the handout section, which is right there next to the Q&A tab. I'd especially like to call your attention to a white paper, a couple of white papers actually that we have got from Veeam today. One of them is going over 2024 data protection trends, and there's another one on 10 steps to Microsoft 365 cyber resilience. As I mentioned, those are free and available to download right now in the handout section. So head over there and get them while they're hot. You will also find there a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events like this one. Take a look and see what we've got coming up in the next few weeks here in the holiday season, and sign up for the ones you like right now. Finally, at the end of this webinar today, we're going to be giving one of you $250 in the form of an Amazon gift card to do Christmas shopping or spend on, whatever it is. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for that prize. The official terms and conditions of the drawing can be also found in the handout section. Right there at the bottom, you will see a link. With that, folks, it's time for me to stop yapping and introduce our speaker for today. It is truly my pleasure to introduce you to Rick Vanover. Rick is the VP of Product Strategy for Veeam. Now, I have known Rick for a really long time. He's an all-around great guy. In fact, I was one of his very first, maybe his first editor ever. He did some freelance writing for me way back when I ran a virtualization magazine. So I've been working with Rick for many years. He is extremely informed and very, very good at presenting the information, a great presenter and speaker, and you're going to learn a lot about the topic today. I am quite sure, because I always learn a lot every time I hear from Rick. So, Rickatron, you are now up, sir. Take it away.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Rick Vanover, the Rickatron, and I am here to talk to you about common data resilience oversights for financial services leaders, IT professionals, and everyone in between. I guarantee you, everyone's going to learn something on this session today. I work at Veeam, but this advice will transcend really anything you're doing to keep your IT services resilient. So I've got some practical tips, all kinds of different perspectives, some data-driven insights that will help you increase your resilience. So let's jump into it. So first thing up, small agenda of what we're going to talk about with our time here together. I'm going to share some observations and data points. This is market-driven research and some of the stuff that we do here at Veeam that helps us kind of shape advice in the market. But again, everyone's going to learn something. I'm going to go through my personal list of common oversights, not product specific at all. In fact, I don't think any of this, except the resources at the end, or product Veeam specific. I'm going to talk about impactful preparation. This is the one thing I want you to keep in mind, because I constantly see it as an oversight preparation. We're also going to talk about some resources for more. So welcome. Thanks for joining. Let's get started. And before I get into the observations and data points, I want to just level set that technology alone will not, by itself, solve for true resiliency? I can be the first to tell you in my professional experience, you kind of need all three of these. You need the right people, the right security teams, the right IT management structure. You also need good, solid processes. What are we doing? Who's working on what? And of course, you need the right technology to get there. All three of these working together to take you to the resiliency outcome you're expecting. One thing better I'll say is I am convinced, in fact, I know for sure organizations today can do levels of resiliency, whatever the business needs. We just need all three of these working together to get to that common goal. Okay, so that's kind of level setting the stage. Let's talk about the first section of some of the advice that we have here today. So we have some observations and data points. And, one of the things I'll say is that here at Veeam, we do a lot of market research. And when I say market research, this is, looking at different audiences, what they call double blind. So it's not a Veeam customer survey. This is the market. We use market research firms. So I want to say that before I forget. But let's first of all just kind of dive into why am I talking to you about this? So I've done a lot of talk around resiliencies and some of the different events. We here at Veeam, I work for the largest provider of backup and recovery solutions in the market. So I would like to think I know a thing or two about resiliency. Spoken at a number of security events. I keep those 3 challenge coins at my desk. I've got a few more of them sprinkled around the house. And I worked at a bank before Veeam. A lot of people who know Veeam and know me, they'll say, well, what did Rick ever do before Veeam? Well, true story. I used to work at a bank, but make no mistake, I was bald then too. But then when I went to the bank, I kind of, evolved in my career and then took a lot of it over to Veeam and love talking about resiliency. And, it's a broad sense. Resiliency is more than just protecting data from bad things. It's also protecting your business and being able to respond to some of the different conditions that come at you. So I want to start now with a data point. Now, I want to, where I can, pull in some numbers to kind of validate what I think makes a big difference, right? I think some of the numbers speak volumes, so I'm going to go through a few of those. I'll repeat some of these because you know what? They're important. This one right here is one of my favorites. We did a survey of, I think, over 1,200 organizations around the world, and they kind of shared a little bit about what happened in their ransomware attacks. And we found that 37% of them had backup repositories affected. That is scary. And what that means is they were affected, meaning all the preparation did not keep that data safe from a potentially bad thing happening. Now, I'm going to show you ways that you can help increase that resiliency, but that's really a bad number. You want to be in the 0% of that, the yellow, and even that's not even good because it only goes up to 20%. You want basically all of your data safe. We're also dealing with the world of hybrid cloud and in this type of scenario. We see about half of organizations are using hyperscales or service providers. I talk to a lot of financial services organizations. That's pretty common. And then on top of that, over the years, what the stack chart on the right bottom tells you is that hybrid cloud is kind of growing a little bit, right? So here we are. That's what some of the data points, but I'll take another one that I want to highlight and talk about a little bit more. Now, when it comes to resiliency, this is something that's really important to me. I kind of grew up in IT preparing for fire, flood, and blood type disasters. You know what I mean, right? But today, the data is telling us that we need to prepare for a cybersecurity incident. When we asked our organizations that responded in the Veeam Data Protection Trends Report, cybersecurity event by far, the blue line doesn't even fit, was the most causal, meaning all causes together for 2023 survey results. 40% of organizations listed that as the most frequent cause of a outage. So cybersecurity event. And then down here, remember I said I grew up preparing for fire, flood, and blood. That's way down low in the end. And then we have this interesting middle, okay? We have infrastructure outages, we have public cloud outages, hardware failures. This is a big one. I think we're never too safe for that. Accidental or error type configurations. These are things we need to prepare for. But what I'm getting at is resiliency is more than just ransomware. It is more than just DR, things like that. It's kind of scary when you think about all the things that could go wrong. But the reality is we need to prepare for them all. I do spin this a couple of different ways, and I say cybersecurity, is the most common and impactful cause of outages. But I'd also say it's kind of by the numbers, the one we're more likely to deal with, okay? Especially because those are usually widespread, and that's the big difference. Everything on this list except this one, you could say some of these other ones, like this one, could be quite large and impactful. But I would say that only the ones that I've highlighted or underlined, maybe it's always the network, right? These are the ones that have widespread incidents, but cybersecurity will consistently have widespread because you don't know how big your blast radius is, right? But we need to prepare for them all. That's the takeaway here. And then in the ransomware or the data protection trends report, we took a good close look on organizational alignment. And this is something that I'm going to hit on a number of times. This is really an area that I think organizations can improve a lot. There is oftentimes a big gap in how aligned organizations are. And what I mean by that is the backup team talking to the cybersecurity team? You could throw the storage team in the mix. You could throw in application teams, like on the delivery side. Are we talking to each other? Chances are most of us are not. Now, if I read this right, 10%, which is 1 + 9, need little or no improvement. Okay, so that's where you'll want to be. Take a look at where you are and tell me if you're close, And then also, why? Why aren't they aligned? Well, there's, a lot of reasons. I think that organizations don't have, this is one that I see a lot in actually my practice, no shared strategy. I think one organization from another has a lot of differences from executive sponsorship. That's a big one. I think we all suffer from kind of constant firefighting, so time resource comes up a lot. I think it's also important that, organizations are just not as connected in the same chain of command, so they're just too far away in the org chart. That's one. And then honestly, just no same tooling and expertise, right? That's a big difference as well. So all of these, I think, I'm no good at math, but that ends up at more than 100%. So people can choose more than one reason. I get it. So if I take a look at some of these points here, what I think is important to know is look at your own practice and ask yourself, how can we do a little better? How can we align across the teams? Let's start with a shared strategy. You can have strategy alignment, this second to last one here, without changing your tooling, without changing your chain of command. So that's an easy one that you can get an immediate quick hit and just first of all be talking to your teams, because communication comes up so many times. One thing I'll also highlight is when it comes to the org chart, that is one of those barriers that I think a lot of people put it in the NMP, the not my problem situation. But I'll be the first to say, with dramatic emphasis and all, that, cybersecurity can be everyone's problem. And I think that not taking some ownership around it can be a very big deal. So give some thought to that. But again, identify your own organization, find out what are the areas that you can start with to make some sizable improvements. And if I were to kind of spin this into what does this mean for financial services, I think that the technical aspects are solved a lot of times by non-technical things. Start with communication. I can say that in my experience in the financial sector, I think they did really good at the communication, but that was also a little bit of an earlier time. I've been at Veeam 14 years, but I still keep in touch with my colleagues there. But what I've learned is that communication is super important. I'm going to draw an example from a healthcare org, not financial, but from healthcare. I debriefed of a ransomware situation where the organization was literally at the potential end of days from a ransomware scenario. And it was a storage integration that basically saved the organization, because the storage integration with Veeam, from the storage team perspective, they weren't talking to the backup team. They weren't talking to the cybersecurity team. They weren't talking to the network team. And our tech support kind of went down and down all these different scenarios. And the very last question was, are you using the storage integration? And our customer said, what's that? Well, that is something that truly saved their business because they didn't know that that storage integration was on there. And turns out they were able to recover everything in just moments with instant recovery that was pulling up those snapshots on that storage system, all integrated by Veeam. Customer didn't even know they had that. That type of communication is really important. So dramatic emphasis. Now, one thing I'll add is that I think it's super clear with that communication, start drawing some of the roles and responsibilities. I can confirm with you, I talked to our tech support team here at Veeam dealing with some of the nastiest types of ransomware cases that are out there. And we, every day, drive organizations through to recovery. There are also times when we hear of things that aren't going as expected. One of the things that I constantly hear is unclear, and these are really similar, roles and responsibilities and chain of command. I have heard of scenarios where organizations will take 3, 4, 5 days to even figure out who's in charge. What are we going to do? It drives our team crazy because we actually can drive a data recovery. We have the backup. We can do a data recovery, but they're not sure what to do. Are they going to declare a disaster? Do we need to get a cybersecurity incident response firm on retainer? These types of things, having this all sorted out ahead of time, this can make your role as a financial services professional, technology-wise, really improved. And if you're an admin, if you're an architect, having these things, these apply everywhere. If you're a CIO, if you're a director, these are absolutely things you should be driving for. But I can say this transcends any role because everyone needs to know their role. Everyone needs to know who to go to, the chain of command. One thing I'll say about chain of command, incident response, I talk a lot with public sector organizations as well. They usually do that pretty good. So if you in your IT org have someone that used to work at a city or a state or a county or a response service or law enforcement, they know this, and this is a good model to start with if this is an area of improvement opportunity for your organization. People with those types of backgrounds can be a good place to start. So now I want to take some common oversights. Okay, so some data points and observations. It's how we started, but how is it going to go next? I want to break down these 5 common oversights because these are scenarios that transcend any scenario, and you as a financial services professional can get started with these pretty easily. Number 1 on my list is not having some form of ultra resilient storage. This is super important, yet it's super easy to do. Now, I will be the first to say this is the single most effective way to drive data recovery in a ransomware incident. But I also will say that, Rick, I've seen you present before. Here you go. You're making up words again. What is ultra resilient storage? Well, an ultra resilient copy is something that is on a media that is either air gapped, offline, or immutable. Now, I would also add one more scenario into that mix, and that is something that requires 4 eyes authorization. Now, 4 eyes authorization is something like pure storage safe mode snapshots, ExaGrid retention time lock, or NetApp snap lock. Those are 3 off the top of my head. Or Veeam Cloud Service Providers have a phenomena there. Wasabi has the multi-user authorization in their web portal. It basically, 4 eyes requires 2 humans to do something data destructive, or requires 2 humans to kind of repopulate a copy of data. But air-gapped, offline, immutable, all 3 of those, including also 4 eyes authorization. Those are very important today. I can tell you that as a data security strategy, having a copy of your critical data in this mode is very powerful. You could call it zero trust. You could say that it helps your organization with incident response and downtime plays, and it does. I can confirm that. It also allows you to do a little bit more aggressive threat hunting because you're not going to interfere with some of the production data. And then also you can really go, aggressive on this. I talk to a lot of organizations that are in more of this immutability everywhere mode. And that is really attractive because, I grew up with the 3-2-1 rule, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But I talk to a lot of organizations that are doing several immutable copies. Really, really powerful stuff. I'll also bring in a quick word from our sponsor here at Veeam that if you don't have something that's immutable, guess what? You can get this right away. Veeam Data Cloud Vault version 2 just came out in November. And basically, you can get that 3-2-1 rule really easily and have Veeam Data Cloud Storage as a service. I'll go right down to the pricing. Here's the deal. These pricing here, you can beat cloud storage. So that's really attractive. So if you don't have an immutable copy, here's some of the details of what it offers. I think that you would really benefit from that. And, we're suggesting 30 days of minimum retention. You can have, I think the minimum is 7 days immutability as well. But check this out at the veeam.com page so you can find more information on Veeam Data Cloud Vault. If you don't have an ultra resilient copy of your backup data, I would call that a plausible emergency. That's why I jumped out to the page and showed it to you. So reach out to your Veeam team if you want to find out more about Veeam Data Cloud Vault. Now, number 2, if you are storing something that's ultra resilient, it's super important. This is an oversight. It's super important that you have keys and credentials at the ready. Now, it's super important to have this backup data, something in immutable copies, right? Super important. We get that. But how do you use it, especially in an incident? This is where this one comes in. I highly recommend that if you put backup data in the cloud, I recommend you encrypt it. And when I say encrypt it, I'm referring to the good encryption, like encrypting your backups in the cloud. I don't want to sound cheeky, but I used to say encrypt your data in the cloud or someone else will do it for you. Now, that is kind of cheeky, but the reality is encrypt it so that A, you know that no one else is able to access this data, but B, if you are to drive a recovery, especially if we get into a scenario of what I call absolute recovery, which is I've lost everything on premises, all I have is this backup data, this encryption password will be necessary for me to recover it. So if you're using something like Delinea or a secret server to hold all of your key management practices, your passwords, your service accounts, stuff like that, make sure in there are things like encryption passwords, bucket keys that can really, really, really save you time. In fact, our Veeam data protection trends indicate that, especially in cyber incidents, they can't really get started in less than 2 hours. And 10% of those are taking a day or more. And then I heard the stories that I was sharing with you about some of them taking several days. Why? Well, maybe forget the chain of command, but even some little things like bucket keys, encryption passwords, these are super important. I also think it is a big oversight to not have backup data off-site. The thought here is, think of natural disaster, of course, but it's really a good idea and it's easier than ever to have a backup data off-site. Now, I live in this world of talking about the 3-2-1 rule, 3 different copies of your data, 2 different media, one of which being off-site. That's how the 3-2-1 rule was made. But the Veeam difference now was that have 1 or more copies that are ultra resilient and have no surprises with automated recovery testing and additional scanning and when backups are done to make sure that they're free of any threats. So you can get there, but these 2 things are the most common oversights. I'll give you a zinger here to throw out, and this is a kind of a big one, but basically here at Veeam, largest provider of backup solutions in the world, I verify this with support every month. If we have a customer that has their backups in something immutable like a bucket and they have their password, we do not have a tech support case on record of an organization unable to recover. That's really powerful. So if you're doing something with immutability, make sure you're also retaining these passwords, the bucket keys, encryption passwords to make it very usable upon that scenario. Which leads me very nicely to advice number 3. Lack of preparation is a common oversight I see. I want to introduce you to Bill Siegel, CEO of Coveware by Veeam. So Coveware is an incident response firm. And in March of this year, Veeam acquired Coveware. Coveware brings an incredible amount of expertise in incident response to ransomware incidents. It also brings a data pipeline of intelligence, some of the threats, and incredible information about how these threats behave. Listening to the negotiators talk is truly fantastic. You can give them a threat actor and you will get really good intel on them. They know a lot about them. But one of the things I can tell you about Bill that really struck me as a big oversight in many organizations is the lack of preparation. Now, when I say lack of preparation, that is really just not being able to handle the incident that's truly in front of them. Now, how you get to that point is by practicing. Do a drill and do it without the SME in the room, for example. Here's this quote that sums it up best. I can tell in the first 15 minutes of a conversation how well or how poorly an incident response is going to progress just based on how prepared an organization presents themselves in the very first phone call. Truly incredible information. And one thing I'll highlight, sliding this over here, I want to draw your attention to coveware.com. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Check out their quarterly reports up here. And here you can get some really good intel on some of these different threats. So let's take the Q3 2024 report. They talk about a law enforcement arrest of some of one of the popular threat actors, talking about extortion. They talk about payment resolution rates getting better over time, which is nice. They see a lot more exfiltration only. They're tracking that, and then they're seeing how much their average payments were from the quarter, the change. And then you also can see just some different, the payment history of when they do have to pay, top list of threats. And this is actually important because if you look at this list here, you may not have ever heard of any of those. The reality is the threatscape changes month to month, day to day. And, the ones that made the big news by name back in the day are not really a threat anymore. These new ones are big ones. And if you look here, how do they get in? I love this data. If you work on these three things, remote access, secured, phish training, and keep things up to date, you have tackled this one, and this one, the first three most popular modes of entry. That's, a good way to start. And then the last piece of advice is just what they do. You can see how they move through the organization. And then if you look through the industry, and that's the main reason I pulled this up, financial services is in here. Let's find it. It potentially could be professional services, capital. Oh, no financial. So public sector is a topic, healthcare. But anyways, you see that by industry, maybe it would be capital goods a little bit, maybe blurs over a little bit. But the reality is ransomware doesn't discriminate. And then if you look at the size of org as well, they go after the big ones here, 1,000, 100 to 1,000, even over 100,000 employees. So big organizations are a candidate as well. All right, back to my regularly scheduled program. Again, lack of preparation, very big, consistent topic. Love this quote by Bill. Challenge yourself, be prepared, go through drills. The last thing I'll hit on this is if you know anyone that's like a pilot or like a scuba diver or maybe anybody with law enforcement experience, they constantly practice the anomalies. And the thought here is that when you train for the uncommon, the moment the uncommon becomes the reality, they're comfortable with it. A lot of people aren't comfortable being uncomfortable, but if you train for the uncomfortable scenarios, it makes it a lot more efficient to have to deal with if you're in. Again, dramatic emphasis. So highly recommend preparation. Number 4, an oversight that I see in organizations is difficulty navigating to different platforms. So as I mentioned earlier, that cybersecurity was one of the impactful things. A lot of times people ask themselves, okay, I need to move, not because I want to, but because I have to. You could add a little bit of a perspective here nowadays with some people reassessing their hypervisor investments. And, you would put We don't have the data to indicate that that is a indicator of outage and move, because it's not really an outage. It's more of a disruption and such. One person I know said that their hypervisor renewal was a financial disaster. It was a set of scenario conditions out of their control. I thought that's an interesting way to put it. But nonetheless, we don't have data on it. But if you make the decision that you need to move, whether it's you have to rapidly change a platform or there's a outage, that's hard. So how do you do that? Well, I want you to know, again, brief word from our sponsor here, is that Veeam is here to help you with data portability. And this is actually very important nowadays. And it's actually not a responsive thing. We've had this in the market for since 2016, the first iteration, where we could help organizations accelerate to the cloud by providing the ability to do recoveries of image-based backups directly to the cloud. We started that with Azure, and then we added AWS, and then we added any image-based backup to go to a virtualization platform, and then we had more virtualization platforms, and physical to virtual, virtual to cloud, physical to cloud. You see where I can go with that. It's very versatile. And same goes for enterprise apps and file shares. A lot of people don't think about those as well. But Veeam can help you move data from old SQL Server to a new SQL Server, old Oracle database to a new Oracle database, old file share to a new file share. In fact, that's a big one, because a lot of them, people might be retiring something off a lease, or removing this brand, going to that brand, that type of stuff. So that's really important, especially when you need it. So check Veeam out for that. All right, now this is a big one. Number 5, lack of consistency. Now, I know I don't have the best view here on my camera, but it's a big thing right here. Where is it? Consistency, consistency, consistency. I don't know if you can see it, but consistency is a big deal with me. And when it comes to inconsistency in environments, I see that as a gap in a lot of organizations' resiliency strategies. There's a lot of reasons for that, especially when you think about the cyber resilience area, because a lot of organizations get in the business of acquiring companies. I get it. I've been there myself. And when that happens, there's an opportunity for like, well, this group does that thing and we've done that. We haven't standardized yet. Have you ever heard that one before? Well, guess what? Threat actors have an infinite number of times to get it right. And us as the good actors, we have to be right 100% of the time. They only need to be right once. So think about that. When it comes to consistency across the organization, funding gaps, time, resources, I know that these are real. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm understanding that these are scenarios. One thing I can give you as practical advice here is to rapidly standardize as much as you can. That makes a huge difference. At a minimum, those two things I spoke of that are the most absolute, that immutable copy, and then having the passwords, the buckets, etc., the encryption to drive that recovery from an immutable backup. That's an easy way to make a lot of impact without, reboiling the ocean. Now, the other side of the consistency I would go is look at some of the different levels of protection. Take away acquisitions where this site does it this way, this site does it that way. Maybe the Americas team does it this way. Maybe the EMEA team does it that way. The other side of it is like, I've used these language. Everyone has like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We've all used that language before. But there's also like the tier 0. Maybe look at your consistency there. Is tier 0 and tier 1 done right, but tier 2 and 3, maybe not? Again, the threat actors only have to be right once. And if you take some of that coveware data, when the threat actors jump around and use infiltration techniques and disruption techniques, command and control techniques, that will, they very well may start at some of the underprotected things or impact some of the underprotected things. And then also funding gaps is a big one where I can't afford to do everything right. I understand that. That's why I think a cost-effective strategy is super important, especially if you can standardize. Little pro tip when it comes to financial services, It can be a compliance play. If you think about all of the different risks of things not being protected or being resilient, if compliance comes into the mix. And I think gone are the days where, if this in scope system gets all the funding and these out of scope systems don't. I don't know. The nature of threats today, I think a case is to be made for allowing organizations to give everything across the board the right level of resiliency. And then that is going to take some time. So that's back to the consistency. If we standardize on how we're going to be resilient, like real simple, that Veeam Data Cloud Vault example. I spoke to a large bank last week when I was in London at an industry analyst event, and the large bank had a lot of different bits and bobs of pockets of this and that because they had different operations in the different countries, and I get that. But they realized some had tape, some had cloud, some had nothing. But they really liked the idea of the Veeam Data Cloud Vault because they could quickly standardize on that and do better than public cloud pricing. So little things that can standardize and be consistent can save you time, and that is an impactful step to overcome one of the next common oversights of resiliency, which leads me to impactful preparation. And this is a big one. So what can we do with this information? I'm giving you a lot of data points, summaries of different experiences. But my goal is that it's something that you can use and benefit from. So let's go first into the first one, impactful DR testing. So what I can tell you, I have experience with this, and it honestly didn't go well when I was, before I really took data protection, business disaster recovery, business continuity seriously. It didn't always go well. And I think we all can remember these scenarios. We go into a test on a Saturday and they bring in free pizza. We test a bunch of stuff. Half of it fails, and the goal is just do better next year. That's not going to fly anymore. So what disaster recovery testing, my observation is that it's grossly underdone. It shouldn't be infrequent, unfamiliar, or unsuccessful, or incomplete. My professional advice to you is to take this testing and reimagine it. Make it frequent, make it familiar, make it successful, make it complete. This can be in small steps. It also can be in big steps. But I think the most practical, most impactful part is to start with a small example and get an early win, get a success. If this is something that's way overwhelming for you, a lot of parties involved, maybe when I was at a bank, we had a outsourced IT partner as well. So there was a cost to do anything more than keep the lights on. Start small and then measure it, because I learned a long time ago, and this is a great saying to hold on to, is that what gets measured gets funded. So if you can measure these types of things and build success, then you have a way to get funded for it. All right, so number one, reimagine testing. It gets specific, I know, but it's important. Some practical tips from a skills and staff standpoint. This is a big one. The SME versus the SMEs. Okay, I made that a plural. This is a big one. I think it's super important to cross-train, have an expert, and then have that expert make other experts, because it is almost predictable that some of the threats that are out there, when they happen, of course they're going to happen when the single SME is on a cruise or in Antarctica or something like that. So and anytime we do aggressive recommendations for drills, tabletops, or even simulations, we make the SME leave the room, so the rest of the team has to do it. So the reality is train up, train over, and that is important nowadays. I also think it's important to stay current on your versionings across anything. I know there's work associated with that, but letting things go obsolete introduces technical debt, and that is a different set of problems, and it's going to catch up with you. And then alignment with other SMEs. So again, people, non-technical things is super important nowadays. I would say that is a very beneficial one that can also, first of all, be consistent and get the organization aligned, but it also can lead to other benefits like funding, business support, And if you go to the application teams, get the business involved outside of IT, then you also can build that organizational support. Additionally, when you think about incoming technology standards, I'd really recommend you really take that seriously. Anything new coming in the door, does it meet your resiliency expectation? Does it solve your resiliency challenges? That's good. I'm not saying don't let anything new in. I'm just saying be judicious with it. I see a lot of times the consistency shows its ugly side here when there's 3 or 4 different ways of accomplishing the same thing and none of them have the resiliency outcome. You can see where I'm going with that. I'd also think end to end. A lot of times organizations and individuals are really good about their boundary of responsibility, but never forget the big picture. Never forget that we have to be thinking about the entire organization. And when you think about financial services, that is actually more important than ever, because all it takes is, let me make up a scenario, customers can't access the mobile app for their accounts. That makes the news, but that might just be one cube of this diagram that powers that. Or organizations aren't able to, call the phone number, right? Those types of things make the news. So you want to make sure that the resiliency thinks big picture, thinks whole company, thinks whole team. And then also never go too far from the compliance state from your stakeholders and balancing the run state. My experience in financial services was that the compliance was, something you could maybe forget about, but never abandon, right? Different projects would take you slightly out of it or whatever, but never go too far from that. I think that the run state today, you need to put compliance high and then further keep it in mind, even for systems that aren't specifically in scope, because A, scope may change. B, you never know what app devs are doing. Are they actually using things in other places that shouldn't be? So if you're already at that level, you're somewhat protected. So that's a good one. The next bucket of advice that I have is really a reiteration of 2 things. I can't overstate how important it is to manage those encryption keys and buckets. Like I said, we at Veeam have had, guided hundreds and thousands, I don't even know, several organizations through ransomware scenarios. And it's super important. If you have an immutable copy, like in a bucket, and you have the encryption password, we have been able to drive recovery. We don't have a case of someone unable to drive recovery. What I mean by that is we have had scenarios where people didn't manage their encryption keys. And that's a really sad ending, to know that a user created encryption password was meant on that resource in the cloud and they weren't able to recover it. So really prioritize getting that data, getting those encryption passwords into the right place. I can't emphasize that enough. Much like if you don't have an immutable copy, if you don't have the bucket and any encryption password managed well, that also is a plausible emergency for your organization. I really want to double down on communication and authentication. And I put those together because when you think about just communicating resiliency and authentication and, broadly from a authorization standpoint more than authentication, I think that if you authenticate and validate your needs, you as a financial service org can get that resiliency level consistent the way you want it. And then have that chain of command. That, again, not a people one. The last 2 are not people. The first one is somewhat technology, but the last 2 are not technology. They're more people challenges. These can make all the difference in the world. Having a plan, again, even if it's not your mission in life, start thinking about this. What you may find is, someone already has a plan. But ask yourself, is it complete? Is it accurate? Is it up to date? Is this person still work with us? I've heard of scenarios where, talk to Bob. Well, Bob quit 3 years ago. These types of things happen. So start your own kind of grassroots discovery. And I'll be honest with you, just unsolicited career advice. When you become dependent for other things, it actually makes you more valuable to the organization. All right. end of unsolicited career advice. Let me give you a few resources for more. So I mentioned this webinar is sponsored by Veeam. First of all, thanks for joining us here. If you haven't heard of Veeam, we are the largest provider of backup and recovery solutions in the world, global. There's no compliance, there's no financial services scenario we haven't been in. So chances are we've been there and you're not the first. Now, I mean that in a good way, that we're not going into uncharted realms. Why do people choose Veeam? Layered security, fast, reliable recovery, and multi-cloud hybrid ready. That's what some of our customers are saying. Bobby from Penske in the transportation space, Merce from Avery Dennison in the retail space, business to business retail, and then Robbie in the healthcare space, right? And we have plenty of healthcare and financial services case studies published at veeam.com. My favorite on this list comes from this one right here. We can do recoveries quicker. That's great. That's awesome. I think that is why you do a backup. I like to say backup for show, recover for dough. And that quote kind of really brings it home to us. So these are why people choose Veeam. And then what we're in the business of doing is providing data resilience. It starts with data backup. That's how people come to know us. But then data recovery is when they love us. And then having the data portability to move to another platform, data security, keeping that backup data safe, and having data intelligence. We're on the edge of some incredible stuff there when it comes to data intelligence. I don't want to give you too much AI, but I'm just going to say, if you want to, it's there. A lot of it's already in the product. And then on top of that, we have a whole bunch of stuff coming around AI. So stay tuned on data intelligence. But our mission in life is to provide data resilience to keep businesses running. One area I want to draw your attention to, we've done a lot of really good things with financial services, is protecting Microsoft 365 data. Got a QR code up here if you want to check out the 7 reasons. Chances are, if you're not backing it up, you should. We have the world's most deployed Microsoft 365 backup solution in the world. And one of the easiest ways to do it is right now with the Veeam Data Cloud. Really intuitive way to have good protection for your Microsoft 365 data. And anyways, talk to the Veeam team if you got any questions about that or anything else. All right, everyone, that does bring me to the end of our session. I'm Rick Vanover from Veeam. I really appreciate you watching us here today, talking about some common oversights and how to fix them for our professional services organizations. I'll turn it over to my colleagues and we'll take your questions now. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rickatron. All right, everyone. Unfortunately, the Q&A part did not work out. They are not able to take questions today, but they will be following up with the questions that you did ask. I always love hearing from Veeam and what they're doing and how they're at the leading edge of so much of IT. Just always great to have them on. So thanks again, Rick, for that fantastic overview. And why don't we get to my last duty here of the event, folks, and that is to give away the $250 Amazon gift card. We do have a winner for this event, and that winner is Jorge Pita from Texas. I saw him come on earlier, so congratulations to you, Jorge. We will be in touch ASAP to get you your card, so sit tight. And with that, folks, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. I want to thank Rick for his fantastic presentation. And I want to thank you attendees for being here and for your great questions, for your interest in this topic, and for being here with me today. You are the reason that we do this, and it's always a blast for me. Can't wait to see you in the next event, folks. But for this event, that's about all she wrote, everyone. Go forth and have a great rest of your day.